We're going to go ahead and discuss Chapter 6, the Introduction to Production and Resource Use. The first idea that I want to talk to you guys about is the idea of perfect competition, and agriculture is the closest firm as any to come to perfect competition. In order for perfect competition to occur, 4 items must be in place. Number 1 must be a homogeneous product. The idea that the product is exactly the same. If we were all almond producers and I asked you all to bring in 10 of your almonds and we put them into a bag and I shook it up and opened the bag, could you find your 10 almonds? I think it'd be pretty challenging because it is a homogeneous product. The second area that we have to be aware of is the barriers to entry or exit, meaning that there's no physical barrier, no barrier that is keeping people from entering the market. If you want to produce corn, produce corn. If you want to produce livestock, produce livestock. There's no force, no economic force keeping you out from doing that. The third area is a large number of sellers. There has to be a bunch of people involved in the industry for a perfect competition to exist, enough so that one person cannot control the market in any way. And the final area of perfect competition is perfect information, meaning that everybody has the same access to the information that is available and needed for that industry. I don't know something that you don't know. We all have access to the USDA. We all have access to Google. We can kind of figure this stuff out. Nobody is special in terms of their individual knowledge. Next, we recognize that for items to be produced, inputs must be brought to bear. And these are the 4 classifications of inputs: the land, labor, capital, management. Now, land is a unique input because it's what we call a fixed input, meaning that you can't change the amount that you utilize during production, at least not easily. You can hire and fire your labor. You can use as much fuel or as less fuel, or put as much fertilizer or not use any fertilizer. The management, the production goals can come into play, so those can all vary, but land doesn't vary. It is a fixed input. Inputs are utilized to create outputs, and this is called the production function. Now, just to simplify it, we're just going to go ahead and use one input called labor. We could use capital, we could use land, we could use management. We're going to go ahead and use an input called labor. So, as we bring labor to bear and hours of people show up, the first point here says we have used 10 hours, and those 10 hours have created 1 unit. The next time we brought in 16 hours, and people working for 16 hours, or 2 people working for 8 hours, those people have created 3. And when you begin to look at it, as we add more labor, as we add more of the input, the output tends to increase. Not forever, but it tends to increase. Now, when we look at the marginal physical product, this is just the amount of labor that has happened on the average. And so we can say, as we add it in labor, every single hour has created 0.33. So you can tell that when we added those 6 people, it increased 2 units of output. So 3 minus 1 is 2. So those 6 units of daily labor increased 2. So how much did 1 unit increase? Well, 1 unit increased 0.33. So we can take simply the change in those 2, divide it by the change in output, and in this case, that was 2 divided by 6, and that would give us our marginal physical product. On the same side, we can see that there is an average physical product. That's a little bit easier to accomplish. The average physical product, we just take the number, the output that we have, and divide it by the input. So in this case, if we talked about the average physical product, we had 1 unit divided by 10, and that gave us 0.10. Or we had 3 units divided by 16, and that gave us 0.19. And so you can see how the marginal physical product and the average physical product are calculated. When we look at the TPP, or the daily output level, on a graph it will look something like this. As we add in more labor, we brought in more people and more people and more people, we can see there's been a change in the total physical product. It's beginning to go up and up and up. And as we add in more people, you can see the slope of the line continues to increase, and add more people and more people and more people, and eventually the slope is getting better, but it's getting better very, very slow, and eventually over time it'll go ahead and go negative. So the TPP curve, if you continue to add in your input of production, eventually it will begin to decrease. So as an example, let's just say you're using fertilizer. You put fertilizer in a plant and it grows. You can add more fertilizer. Oh, and it grows more. And you can add more and more and more. But eventually, as you add more of that input, it will have a negative consequence, and your total physical product will begin to diminish. You can over-fertilize plants and cause their production to go down, or even plant death. This idea of increasing variable inputs and having it be less and less effective over time is called the law of diminishing marginal returns. While you can add more labor as a variable input, eventually, as you add more people, the effectiveness of those people begins to decrease. If we plotted the marginal physical product curve and the average physical product curve, it would look like this, and they would demonstrate our stages of production. The marginal physical product, as we examine it, we can tell that we have added in some input, and on the margin it's doing really well. We added in some more input, and wow, it's doing really well. And we added in some more, and it's not doing quite as good, but recognize it's still, at this case, it's still above the average. So if we look at the average, we can see that our MPP curve is higher than the average. So you are producing a product better than the average, and that's a good thing. So when we consider this, as long as you're producing a product and you're always better than the average production, it's a good idea to continue to produce that product. When you get to the spot where your MPP is equal to your APP, when you get to that spot right there, you have crossed the barrier from stage 1 to stage 2. Now, stage 1 says keep on adding inputs because your marginal physical product is higher than your average physical product. That's stage 1. If we keep on watching our marginal physical product as it moves through stage 2, we're adding more people, we're adding more people, we're adding more people, and it is becoming less and less effective. And eventually, you can see on the margin, if you look down at the change from stage 2 to stage 3, we can see at that point our effectiveness is at 0. If you follow this line back to the left-hand side, you can see our effectiveness is 0. And at that point, why would you add labor if it's not having any positive effect for you? That area is identified as stage 3. And stage 3 is another area that we would not operate in. We don't operate in stage 1 because our marginal physical product is better than our average, so keep on adding inputs. But in stage 3, We want to make sure that we don't enter stage 3 because we're adding labor, we're adding these inputs, and they're having a zero or a negative effect. And again, why would you add fertilizer to your crops if you know it's going to kill your crops? You're at that point in stage 3 where we don't want to operate. So that leads us to consider, where is the sweet spot? Where is the ideal spot? Well, we know somewhere in stage 2 is the best place for us to be producing. Somewhere in stage 2. Is it on the left side of stage 2? Is it on the right side of stage 2? It's hard to determine at this juncture in a game, but we just know it's going to be in stage 2. Before we can determine exactly where the sweet spot is, we have to take a look at the cost of our inputs. We need to know what's the price of the product and the cost of the inputs before we can figure out exactly where should a producer be producing in the production function.